Hey, hey, people. Soul dancer here, the white dragon. I am love, discernment, confident, resourceful, assertive and unstoppable. A beacon, called to share my light and talents with the world, and to be real, generous, and inspiring. My name is Catherine Hidalgo, and I'm just here to give you my story in brief. I didn't plan it, but events have pushed me to this point. I don't like to get angry because I know how powerful mine is. All anger is powerful, but mine, as I learned in my adolescence, can literally destroy people. I grew up in the Twin Islands state of Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad, it's an island. It now has a population of 1.4 million people. It's an island as well up here. All right? When you are not interested in growing and you want everything to be the same, that is what happens. Nothing changes. A lot of it has to do with fear. So I grew up in this place. I left because I felt that it had become too small. I worked for the United Nations in various capacities in New York and then in Switzerland. I got to travel, which is what I always wanted to do, see the world. And then it became sticky. Geneva in particular. The life was wonderful, international. You could ignore the Swiss with their lack of social skills. The money was fantastic. And then when I decided to leave after 20 odd years, I lost it all. There was a lesson in that, but I couldn't figure out what the lesson was. Anyway, I went through all sorts of things. So because I lost it all, I had to return to a place, a country that I swore I would never set foot on. I grew up in a place and in a family where psychological, physical, and sexual abuse was the norm. Okay. So now, on my return, because no growth had taken place in, oh Lord, that wasn't my mother's dog interfering with stuff in the garden that she's not, in the tiny garden that she's not supposed to touch. Moving right along. I won't tell anyone if you won't. So, returning here now, being forced to return. Hello, people. Being forced to return, what happened? Because no growth had taken place, even though I visited often, but a visit is not living. I had changed beyond recognition. No one else had. And keep in mind, I was always different. My difference was not appreciated. I even spoke differently. When you live in a non-English society, and I am fluent in French, you change, you adapt, your speech pattern changes because, of course, you have to make sure that you're understood. So I returned here, and what happened? After a few months, I was kicked out. I had nowhere to go. I knew no one. I ended up on the street. I spent 3.5 years in a homeless shelter. And during that time, I wrote my first book. That was amazing. I connected with people. I literally lived in the library and went back to the shelter. It is an infamous shelter here in Trinidad. And there's no support, there's no care, there's no security, there's no nothing. I had nowhere else to go. And this is the part that's important. That's why I put hurt people, hurt people. Before I ended up in the shelter, I lived on the street. I lived in the bush. I lived in, I would ask people on the street, and I would get a bed for a night, a bed for a week, etc. I was almost raped on the street, and when I was sleeping outside of a well-known drug company, and it's because of the security officer. Now, I did not know that thoughts like that don't cross your mind when you're outside. It's just survival, and as a woman finding a lighted place at night to sleep. So there I was in this corner, the lights all around, a massive parking from the Holiday Inn across, so it's well lit, and I see this car pass by with two fellas in it, and I knew it was trouble. They made another pass, and the third time they decided to reverse, and I did not know what I was going to do. Suddenly, the door next to me opened, and I realized it was the security guard. You know what that man did? He didn't look at me. He pulled out a cigarette, he lit it. Have you ever seen anyone smoke a cigarette for 15 minutes? That is exactly what he did. And when those men, those two men in the white car, small white car, reversed for a fourth time, and they saw him, they drove off and they never returned. When the security officer returned inside, I guess after making sure that they weren't going to return, he still didn't look at me, he didn't say a word. That was my guardian angel. The next morning, because I didn't know where I was going to shower, where I was going to clean up, etc. Can you imagine? You are homeless and you're literally sitting on your Burberry bag and your Gucci bag because it was raining, the concrete was cold, you know. So because that's how I slept, I sat on the bags and I leant my back, I leaned up against a wall. When I looked over, I saw a man opening the gate of the car park to Holiday Inn. He left it open and he walked away and he looked back, and I understood immediately. He allowed me to come in from the back, and that's how I was able. That was I don't remember what night it was, maybe my first or second night on the street, and that's how I was able to clean up that first night. So I would walk around during the day. See me in my, what I call my island sarong. I would walk around during the day just looking for safe places to sleep that were well lit. And that used to be my sleeping spot. And I would go to, not McDonald's, the closest fast food place, and whenever and if anyone left a cup of soft drink or whatever on the table, I took it, I would drink it. I had no money. So eventually, and I would speak to people, I would ask can I have $10, and you know, they would give me more than that, $50, $100 and stuff. It's okay. So eventually, from speaking to people and always finding somewhere to clean up myself to continue to look presentable and change, etc., I started going to the library. Beautiful, clean toilets. It's true they had no shower, but I made do. And through speaking to people and signing up at the library, I was able to make contact with a teacher who told me about a place, an NGO that helped, what are they called? Those people who were jailed and then once they did deportees. And that's how I got in contact with this organization, because every other place I had called, all of the so-called Christian organizations, and I mean I called everyone, and all the references that they gave me, I called them as well. No interest in taking in someone. All right, so I really don't know who, in fact, they did support. I suppose you should not be speaking the way I speak or anything like that, and they never met me. They just went by my voice. One person even asked me if I was Catholic. And when I said I had no religion, she hung up the phone. That was it. So this particular place, they said the only place that they could send me right now is that shelter. And that's how I ended up living there for 3.5 years. Listen, I was beaten up in that shelter. All sorts of things happened to me. And this particular incident, this is another people who heard people's story. And in this particular one, this man who was attracted to me, stone killer, and he admitted it himself. Everyone was terrified of him. I am afraid of nobody except myself when I allow myself to get angry. And I mean really angry, because I have my inner spirit, which is crocodile alligator, centuries old. When he rises, watch out, you will be annihilated. So this man, because I rejected his advances, he started stalking me in the shelter. Now there's one floor for women only. It's very small, 22 women maximum, and the other floors are for men. Now, if that stone cold killer was a resident and he had his own home, but apparently he lived in an area where there was a lot of gang shooting. So he said bullets used to come through his roof, which is why he decided to move to the shelter. Okay, so the man beat me up. I would go to, when he asked me the very, very first time what kind of man I'm looking for. Can you believe that? I said, a man who has goals, who has a life, who knows what he wants in life, who is strong and self-confident in himself, which means he has all the accoutrements to go with it. Car, house, money in the bank, he is learning. Suddenly I found myself on the ground. I didn't know what happened. This man had actually hit me in my face. I found myself on the ground. I couldn't believe it. The staff rushed up because one individual, a man on another level, as they call it, not floor, saw it happen. And the woman came up. Am I okay and whatnot? But that was it. This man was not kicked out of the shelter. And I suffered from PTSD for months. I had never been hit in my face in my life. I mean, I grew up being beaten as a regular thing here to work out mother's anger in this case. And it's usually parents' anger. They call it licks, right? Brutal. So what was I to do? I did not leave that section for the women for months. The manager came. He didn't say a word except to say, well, are you okay? And you really should go out and so on. I finally knew where the library was, and shaking like a leaf inside, but you couldn't tell it on the outside, I left. Went to the library. This man followed me. I went to the police station to report it. Coming back, he was standing there waiting for me. I took the abuse. What else could I do? And once I got over it, I reported it again to the nearest police station. And so it went. He harassed me, threatened me. And when I used to be so terrified. And that's when I understood, because I've been a voracious reader since I was very, very small, under 5. And I remember in my adolescence reading a line, when your guts turn to water. That's precisely what happened with me. You literally feel as if you have a constant state, continual diarrhea, because you feel as if liquid is running down your legs. That is terror, pure terror. And I lived in that for months. And I would be stalked. This man would enter the woman's dormitory level. No male is supposed to do that, because then they are immediately kicked out of the shelter. But even the management was terrified of this man that they allowed to stay there. So I didn't sleep. because my bunk was next to a wall with decorative bricks where you can see outside but no one can see inside. And I saw him, he was so strong, he was a stevedore on the port. This man was so strong that one night I actually saw him break off a piece of PVC with his fingers. And so it was like a V with a point, because of course he had also been jailed many times, and preparing himself to come in and kill me. I didn't sleep at all that night, and all I did was kept talking to God for help, because I didn't have help from anybody else. There was no help from anybody else. I eventually fell asleep. That was between, I don't know, maybe 11 at night, because he himself, I remember, had told me that, you know, a person's weakest hours is at 3 a.m. And he turned up around midnight. I don't know what woke me, and I did not go to sleep until 6 a.m. when he left. The energy was terrifying. I didn't say a word to anyone, simply because there was no one to tell. The staff were terrified of him. The manager was a waste of time, and the manager was also in cahoots, stealing residents' money. People who didn't have bank accounts, they would deposit it there, and it wouldn't be written in a book, and then the manager would say that the money was lost. So eventually, when I went to the library, I reported it to the police. But it kept happening until one day, the court date finally turned up. He mentioned the court date to me. In the court, the district court, he didn't turn up. How did he know? It took me months to understand that he had a friend in the nearest police station who knew his father, who was also a police officer. And this man used to boast that his father in Tobago, the other island of the Twin Islands state, was the biggest, baddest policeman in Tobago. When you hear somebody is bad, you know that they are not only corrupt, but they are terribly violent. And he was proud of that. So once I understood, when I went to make a report again of this man chasing me, this man chased me across a highway, and I used to flag down cars. It was peak traffic time with people going home. I flagged down cars and asked them to please, please, please take a photo of this man, so that if you all see that anything wrong in the newspapers, if you see any report of me, you know you can take that photo literally to the police station. I remember one woman that I happened to flag down, she looked at him terrified and she drove off, and she was in a car. So that man beat me up in the street. Okay. After that, I went back to the shelter, which was just across the road. They were all onlookers. No one said a word. Once I got over that, I went to the police station and he followed me. But this is when I discovered that is how he knew about the warrants. Because I mentioned something to the officer who was taking my report, and he said something that I had never told anyone. And that's when I knew. So I stopped making reports to that police station, and I went to the central police station instead. After that, this is when I had to stand up, because that had been going on for 8 months or so, with nothing happening. Court dates, I would attend everyone until the magistrate called me forward before that particular day and told me, she said, listen, I want you to do something. What you are going to do is start writing down everything that happens. I want you to write down the date and the time. And whenever you have a court date, I want you to bring this information, because this is going to be added to your file, and one way or another, we are going to get this individual to stand up in front of me. And I followed exactly what she said. So a few months after that, this is what you call the penultimate story. Hi Raylene. What happened then was, one day, I think it was the day before the next court case, I went to the bathroom. It was late in the evening. And turn around to come a step out of the toilet stall. There he was, standing in the toilet in the ladies' dorm with a 12-inch knife. I tell you, I swore right then that my life was over. I did. 12 inches of steel with a white bone handle, and the edge was shining. He sharpened it well. And I looked at him and I said, very calmly, because let me tell you all something, you can only be terrified for so long, and it's either you implode or you stand up. And I told him, when you stab me, when you kill me, make sure really that I am dead. Whatever you are going to do with that knife, make sure that you kill me dead. Because if not, and using my finger like that, I am going to get you. That's what I told him. And he stood there, and it was as if my hand is shaking, and it was as if he deflated. I literally saw him become very small physically. He lowered his hand with the knife and he walked away. I went to court and I told them what happened. No, I told the prosecutor what had just happened that morning, and that was before the magistrate came in. And I didn't realize that he was prompting me, because he said, don't you, the person didn't come again, and he said, but don't you have, listen to that bird. He said, don't you have something else to say? But still I was really cowed. I was still terrified and shaking from the encounter, and I didn't understand. Because if I had, I would have shared the story, and I knew that another type of warrant would have been issued by the magistrate, but I didn't know. I mean, who knows about how courts work? So the story went on for a few months until I made a report about it, that same incident, to Central Police Station. And a female SWAT officer happened to be passing by, and she heard me and she said, come with me. She took me to a room. She said, I'm putting you here to sit down, and I want you to tell this officer what you were just reporting. And I want you to tell them the name of the person. I did not know it was CID. I did not know it was a detective I was speaking to. I did not know that the man was well known to them. And that is how I got that fucker. Because they then took me to the head of CID, who knew this man, who knew his reputation, and he told me what they were going to do, because this would not be allowed. They did not know that he had gone back to his criminal ways, and they were going to deal with it. And deal with it they did. This is my story of how hurt people hurt people. Eventually I heard, I don't know how long after, because by then I had left the shelter, perhaps 3 months after leaving the shelter. I'll tell you another story about that some other time. But I heard that he was in hospital, and I don't know how I knew, but I knew he was dying. I went outside of hospital hours, and guess what happened? When I went, the security looked at me and she let me in. This isn't done. This never happens. People only are allowed onto hospital wards during visiting hours. She looked at me and she let me in. And I went, I asked for him, I saw him. He had shrunk down. The man had AIDS. He had shrunk down to, I don't know, skin and bones, and he was wearing a diaper, Pampers. And I just felt so, my heart opened so wide. I started to cry. Really, I started to cry. I couldn't believe it. To see this monster shriveled down to nothing. The nurses looked up and they just all stayed away. And I called the police officer and told him that I wanted to drop the case because the man was in hospital and I don't think he was going to survive. I forgave him right there. I forgave him right there. A week later, I heard that he had died. And that was just before the other court case, because he had been jailed until the court case. But because he had gotten ill, apparently, they took him to the hospital. And when I heard he died, I called the officer. Listen, I have had so much support from police officers. I have always liked the military. I have always had a particular connection with the military. Even when I was abroad, whether it was the different African soldiers, German soldiers, Swiss soldiers, German police, etc., I've always had a particular connection with them, and it was the same here. These police officers, every single one, went to bat for me. They stood up for me. So when I called my friendly Central Police officer, he said he would deal with it. He called me back because the man had many aliases, and I gave him one that was unknown to them. And so it ended. I discovered later on that the man had died, but not only that. Just before discovering that, I had a dream of him as a young man, but he was so clean, so pure, so fresh. That was his soul, but I didn't know until I met someone from the shelter who told me he had died. And that's when I knew he came back as his innocent self, shy to say goodbye. And that, people, is my story of how hurt people hurt people. I want you all to pay attention to that. And on this note, I'm going to say ciao.